One of the things that we talked about last time you were on the show that was very popular is tape trading and just, your history with tape trading. And we wanted to touch on this topic again, Jim. I'm curious, when exactly was the first time you saw certain territories and what were your initial thoughts? Like, when was the first time you saw Dallas TV or MidSouth TV? And what did you think when you first saw them?
The first time I saw MidSouth TV was probably like 1980-ish, right after I got a VCR, because Randy Hales, who also was one of the early VCR guys, he lived in Jonesboro, Arkansas, because he was working, as an announcer, and that was before he started booking in Memphis, but he did some announcing and et cetera. And the top northwest corner of the Watts territory abutted the lower southwest corner of the Memphis territory. And so Randy would send me some tapes, snowy, but some tapes of MidSouth TV, and it was just, it was fantastic. The matches were great. When you've got talent down there like that at that time, like Ernie Ladd and DiBiase and Orndorff's early days, his first, real top spot after I won't say first real top spot. He'd been in Crockett and teamed with Snuka, and he'd been here, et cetera. But anyway, great talent, believable. I thought it was great. The Dallas TV, when I first saw it, was those dark days right as Fritz was retiring and the boys were wrestling, but it was still the Armand Hussein type, heels.
Yeah,
and,
early 82 maybe.
Yeah, in between 80 and 82, before the Freebirds came in, where, Dallas had become a shell of its former self as far as it didn't supply talent to the entire state of Texas. Paul Bosch had split off and gone with the AWA champion, and then Houston, or then Mid-South, and Joe Blanchard had started Southwest and gone on his own. And, of course, the Funks territory, it wasn't the Funks anymore, but Amarillo was still on its own. So Dallas had been a bigger money territory when Fritz was still on top and in his prime, but had kind of sunk, and the boys hadn't caught on yet because they had nobody to fight. So the Dallas TV was a little bland, little dry.
Where did you get it?
Well, I remember this one guy in Detroit that actually he had connections because he even had VCRs before I did. And I would get a compilation tape, and there would be some chic stuff from Detroit, late 70s. There'd be even Memphis stuff that I had not gotten, that I'd seen, but I didn't have a VCR yet. And Atlanta stuff, DiBiase taking the 5 pile drivers on the floor. He would have these compilation tapes, and it was on some of those. And then, of course, very early, I also saw the Japanese tapes and got a hookup for those. So it was different people mailing each other, different tapes from all over the country.
Well, it's something that Bix and I had talked about on the show before. Something that happened to me when I first started tape trading. Were you ever burned? Where you sent someone a tape and they didn't send you something back, or they didn't send you what you agreed to, or the quality wasn't what was represented?
I wasn't worried about quality at that point because it was better than what we'd had before, which was nothing. I mean, when you think about it, I'm getting a tape of wrestling from outside my area 3 months after the very first time that I ever had a VCR in my home. It was like, my God, this is incredible. I can actually tape TV programs in my house. That's unheard of. Who the fuck have ever thought we could do that, right? So people today don't understand what the fuck that was like. So I don't care what quality it was. The same guy from Detroit sent me a copy of Raiders of the Lost Ark when it was barely out of theaters, but it actually had been taped by a guy in a camera in the back row. You can imagine what that looked like. But what the fuck quality? As far as I'm sure I probably burned people too, just not meaning to, just by, oh shit, you sent me 2, I only sent you 1, or I forgot to send it, because it was a loose thing. It wasn't really, that orchestrated yet.
Yeah.
You were just glad to get anything, right? Once again, when I first got cable, I was like, shit, there's 35 fucking stations on this thing now, because I'd only had 4 before. So what, it wasn't like you were picking at nits in those days.
When was the first time you saw, I guess, I guess I'll call it southeastern, whatever, or part of the territory that eventually became continental. Anything like, whether it's from Knoxville or Alabama or whatever.
Oh, well, now that was in the mid-'70s because my uncle Harold lived in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And when we would go down for family vacations, the first thing I would do, and it was great because now think about this. Little bitty Oak Ridge, Tennessee in the mid-'70s had cable. And the reason, I've been told the reason why that they had cable in some of the outlying areas in East Tennessee at that point was because it was almost impossible for some of those people in the hills to pick up more than one or two TV stations.
Right.
And still, in the mid-'90s, there was a cable system, if you can call it that, in Western Virginia, up around Hayside, Virginia, in that area. Those people will know what I'm talking about. And that cable system served those people because they could only get one TV station if they had an antenna, Channel 5 out of Bristol. Everything else, it was too remote and isolated. So they had a local cable system that had about 12 or 14 channels they'd bring in, and that's what you could watch. But depending on what was on and the whims of the guy that ran the cable system, Channel 8 might be one station one week, and it might be another station the other week, depending on if there was something better on. And this was 20 years ago. But I got to watch Knoxville wrestling on Channel 10, WBIR, Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock for Southeastern Championship Wrestling with Les Thatcher and Phil Rainey. I also got to see Crockett Show Worldwide Wrestling from Channel 13 in Asheville, North Carolina, Saturday night at 11:30 after the news. And I also got to see Chattanooga, the Goulas tape, with Harry Thornton hosting off of Channel 3, I believe it was, WRCB in Chattanooga. So, and Channel 17 Atlanta, the first time I saw Dusty Rhodes, the first time I saw the TBS show on Saturday nights. It was, so I loved to go to Uncle Harold's, but they always wanted to go fishing. And I was like, no, give me a sack of potato chips and leave me alone for Saturday. I'm going to watch 7 hours of fucking wrestling. And I would sit there in front of the TV and never leave while they were out fishing. And it was much better than going to my Aunt Lola's across the river from Cincinnati because all I could get there was the Sheik's TV, which I like to watch on occasion. But 1 hour of Sheik's TV from Detroit versus 7 hours of Southeastern and all that other stuff was there. No, there's no way.
Yeah.
When you first saw MidSouth, was that when Terri Orndorff was around, or was this after?
Yeah, no, Terri Orndorff was down there then at that point, and the Angel, Frank Morrell, who I would later come to know well from Tennessee, and he managed some, had just finished his big run with Rock Hunter and the Assassin and those guys, and they had just started going to the Superdome in those days, and so it was really cool.
What was Terri Orndorff like? Because that era is not really floating around, and it's like he's a guy who it's kind of weird because he was sort of a star and he was Paul's brother, but people don't really talk about him. I don't think I've ever seen him. Brian, have you ever seen him wrestle?
I've seen a clip here and there, maybe some 81 Mid-South, but very, very little of him. He's in a bunch of the programs I have from that time, but there's very little I know about him, and I certainly haven't seen that much of him.
Actually, nobody has mentioned his name to me in probably 30 fucking years. I remember seeing him. There wasn't anybody on MidSouth TV at that point that wasn't really a pretty good worker. So it wasn't like he stood out as being, like this is George Goulas or whatever. I don't think that he and Paul were really brothers, were they? I don't know who he was or where he went afterwards.
I thought he was really his brother.
Well, maybe I've never asked Paul about it. Never thought to. I don't know. Now that, as a matter of fact, let's put it out for the fans who of the 605 Super Podcast and also the Jim Cornette Experience. Fill us in on Terri Orndorff.
I got a weird question for you, Jim. It was something I talked about with Bix here on the show before, just about my enjoyment with Memphis, watching old Memphis tapes, and how the look of the studio, sometimes it takes away. If it doesn't look cool enough to me, it's not as good as the stuff that does look cool. What was your favorite look of the Memphis studio? When it had the black background or the blue background, or what did you think was the best look?
Well, actually, I liked the blue because the black. And also selfishly for my videotapes, It showed the Ghost, because this was before cable. We didn't have cable in Louisville here where I live until after I'd already moved away and gotten a business. So I had that big antenna up on my roof, but I believe we've talked about this. Daggum, they built that bank building in downtown Louisville and it put a Ghost in Channel 3 for the people out here in the eastern part of the county. So, but the blue, it wasn't even blue. It was a flat, like a beige a background that they would then hit with colored lights, and whatever those colored spots and gels that they put at the foot of the background would color the back wall with, however they wanted it to be colored. And it was cool, and they could switch it around a lot. But I like that because it just kind of it brightened things up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I remember back at Channel 13 before they moved to Channel 5 in 1977, Channel 13 studio, you could see like a concrete block wall, and then there was a curtain, and then there was a cardboard box sitting there. And, it was not a pretty studio.
Well, nothing is cheaper than ICW TV from, around that period. Oh, my
God. That was over at it used to be Channel 62 in those days. Now it's Channel 36, but it was the weak sister of the 3 TV stations in Lexington, and they had one row on 2 sides of the ring of fans because they shot like a weekday at like 10 in the morning. And in the early days, they actually had a background with people painted on it that they would put behind that one row.
Oh, like in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, they did it. Yeah, they did it up there too. And then they got away from that, and they just had one row on 2 sides of the ring of people.
Honestly, I would say from the little we've seen, the Knoxville All-Star Outlaw TV that sort of was either concurrent with and then morphed into ICW or however it happened. Yeah, I think that looks cheap. Yeah. I think that looks cheaper because it looks like it's in someone's living room.
It did, and it almost was, and it was right before ICW because that's the time where Ron Wright and had broken off because he wasn't being quote unquote paid like a partner, and Orton and Roop and Malenko and Garvin had broken off and formed All-Star Wrestling with him away from Southeastern. But meanwhile, the Pafos and their group were running ICW out in Paducah and Cape Girardeau, and they kind of met in the middle in the Lexington area and pooled their resources. And I was also, that's the one that people now these days go, oh, that TV studio bullshit. In its day, Channel 5's Memphis studio show was exciting. There was a ton of people in there. It was always packed. As a matter of fact, there was a waiting list. You had to have a ticket to go in. The tickets were free because Channel 5 wasn't in the business of selling tickets to charge admission, but you had to have a ticket to come in their studio. So there was a waiting list at one time of up to 6 months to get a ticket to get into that studio where they would hold maybe, 100, 125 people at that point. But what a great atmosphere it was. And they were so loud and in such a small space, you could barely hear yourself think.
Other than Pafo's ICW, do you recall any other outlaw groups that ran against Jarrett during that time?
Actually, there was nobody of any note, and nobody really with Nick tried to come up to Louisville in 1978, and succeeded. The only wrestling program I know of in the last 50 years to get on Channel 11, which was kind of the Rudy Tooty Snooty station. But otherwise than that, really, no, there were a few outlaws. There was a group over in Georgetown, Kentucky, outside of Lexington that would run at this little barn. And there were a few, Bobby Fulton, that was one of the first places he ever worked when he got into business as a teenager. But there was really no appreciable opposition to speak of. And even when Nick couldn't take his own, former territory back, and when, the Pafos, even with Randy Savage and Bob Orton Jr. and Ronnie Garvin and recognized stars, when they couldn't make a go of it, nobody else was going to fight Jarrett. They were the established incumbent, and they weren't going to get rattled out.
Now, I know it technically wasn't an outlaw promotion, really, because it's not like they were opposition or anything, but last year when I was doing that E. Gilbert article, because it's where he started, I talked to you a little bit about the Malden, Missouri promotion that Henry Rogers had, and recently going through some old newsletters, I found out they had TV at least sometime. Did you ever see that?
Well, no, and most people didn't see. Here's the thing. Malden, there was a guy named Henry Rogers who was a promoter in Malden, Missouri, which was in the Memphis market because Memphis, of course, sits right on the bluff at the river there. So they're across the river from Arkansas. They're not far from Missouri. They're right next to Mississippi. So it's kind of a corner there. And this one town, he only ran Malden Saturday nights. He had a building. And I think their TV was basically, that was the early days of when you could take a camera out and use videotape, right? Late 70s, early 80s. And they probably, like a lot of independents do now, they had one camera sitting on a tripod, and then they shot it and they took the tape over to the local station that back then probably, it certainly wasn't a network affiliate, I'm pretty sure. If it was, number 204 out of 204 TV markets in the country. It was not on Memphis TV, I don't think, or it wouldn't have lasted long. Although, there was a couple of times where the Poffos were able to get on, I think, Channel 24 in Memphis, which was their first independent station back then. That's, when they went from 3 stations to 4. But you could get a TV show on those days late at night, maybe for a little bit of money on a weak station that had just started, but you didn't get much viewership.